for some reason.
Now it's saying it's recording.
Okay, good. Excellent. I started doing that after technical issues started happening because I got freaked out. All right, here we are. I can see us. This is great. Ah, that was loud. Okay. Fantastic. So welcome everyone this week to So Ask Us. We have Jennifer Moyston, who is the Administrative Assistant and Community Participation Officer for the Town of Amherst. And I'm really excited that she's coming on today because we recently realized that we're working on a lot of congruent projects. And so we're going to dig into some of what she's working on today. Jen, thank you so much for coming on So Ask Us.
Oh, thank you for the invite. It's an honor to be here.
Thanks. I'm gonna get a little blushy. So the place I wanted to start with you, because I just think it's so awesome, is that you grew up in Amherst. So your experience of Amherst is so rich and so deep. And I would love, do you mind just sort of charting for us your path to being actually in town government? Because it's pretty unique.
It is unique, and I probably would have never thought it 10 years ago that this is where I would be. But, you know, we're all have our own destinations, and this is where mine has brought me so far.
Amen.
So I grew up in Village Park, which is off of East Pleasant Street. And you know, for Village Park, for me, is the definition of community. I grew up in a place where there was lots of sidewalks for play. We had hills to sled on and a merry-go-round. And there was just really a overall feel of community because we all grew up together from like 4 or 5 years old into our teenage years. And, everybody's parent was in charge of us outside. Everybody's dad was somebody else's dad. It was a great community. There was, no family was necessarily the same. So it gave us the ability to think outside the box as we grew older and to be acceptance of difference and family and family structures, right? So we had families that had a mom and dad. We had families that had one mom. We had families that had dad. We had families that had two moms, and we had families that had grandmoms in them. Like, so it was just this, just very, very versatile and diverse in that manner of different. And so it gave you the ability to be accepting of people and their differences right from a very young age.
And that's so crucial. I mean, the sort of constant conversation around what can be taught and what really has to be felt, what really has to be appreciated and enjoyed. And growing up in that environment, it just, by osmosis, you see the world in a certain way.
You do. I mean, you honestly, I would go up the hill into the 3 bedrooms and probably get into some kind of trouble up there and get sent down. But it just seemed like on my skip hop all the way back home that every parent was out there giving me that look. What were you up there? So it was like this information of highway. And again, it was like it takes a village, right? And so it was Village Park. And then that's how we all grew up. And it's just, I feel blessed. I wouldn't have traded it to live. It is considered low income housing. And honestly, I wouldn't have traded that to live anywhere else because it has made me who I am today.
Right. And I feel like we wish for all people to be able to say that about their childhood.
Yep.
Do you feel like, go, please.
Well, I was just going to say that the kids that I grew up with, right, we, some of us are just in touch via Facebook, but we're still family. Like, that you can call on each other and each other if you need them.
Are a lot of people still in Amherst?
No. So I think that's like something else to that's something to consider though. Like, how do we get people to stay, right? Like, how do we get our folks who are raised here to stay?
Yeah, to stay and to come back.
Yeah.
Right. They're living their lives in other places. I mean, it feels like there are a lot of people sort of returning to the Valley. And it makes me curious about Amherst and all the change that Amherst is in right now and what that looks like to people who grew up here who might be watching from the outside or getting information from the inside.
Yeah.
Do you feel like there was a point at which, and I think this is natural for any child, at which sort of Village Park was your whole world, and then you kind of were able to step back and see the larger town that you lived in and what the difference might have been between that small, really warm community? Did the bigger town feel warm in that same way?
So I think just as you get older and start exploring out, you begin to see that more,
Mm,
right? So there is
yeah.
that piece of you like, oh wait, you don't have neighbors that have two moms, or you don't that was
Right.
like what? Really? We've got lots of those. So there's, there's just, and I'm trying to think too, like I know my oldest son, who's 26 now, is in Tulsa, and I just feel like one of the best things was to raise him here, and then
Yeah.
I wanted him to stay. There's just more opportunity in other places, but just knowing that he left with um mindfulness,
Yeah.
right, of other people,
Yeah.
is wonderful, and being able to acknowledge the differences from our little tofu curtain and the real world, 'cause there was a big difference, right? Like, we
Yes.
are in our little tofu curtain, which is still
Yeah.
has its own issues with inside of it, but compared to the 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 nation in entirety, we are very, blessed, I will say.
Yeah, absolutely. I grew up in the area as well in Belchertown and then Northampton, and have lived in a couple bubbles now in my life. The bubble here, I lived in Asheville, North Carolina, which is a like hardcore bubble.
Yeah.
Um, and it does, I think, sort of set a good standard. Like, what kind of feedback do you feel like you get from your son about his being raised in Amherst? Does it feel similar to what you experienced being raised here?
No. So
No.
he's experienced some really racial,
Mm,
discrimination out there. So he's
yeah.
biracial, and so sometimes that it's even worse than I think actually him just,
Mm,
if he was one race or another, I think people look at that differently. But,
mm,
his whole take one day was, it's different when you're in Amherst when it's like subconscious bias, right? Like people are
yeah.
microaggressions, right? Like no one's going to say anything to you about are you stealing something in the store, but they're going to follow you around
Right.
versus having it head on. But you can't really
Right.
prepare anybody for that head on, incident that might occur.
Yeah.
But, and so that's, really what it's a whole different life out in Oklahoma, to actually tell you the truth.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. So from growing up here and then kind of where we are now a little bit, like what feels like the sort of biggest pieces of evolution that you've seen, not only from your position in town government, but just as a resident, as someone living here, what are some changes that you feel like really aware of in that time?
so there's a couple of things, and I don't know that they're necessarily positive or negative or
Hmm.
one or the other, but things that are the same is, I feel like the same issues that happened in the school system are still occurring now, right?
Hmm.
Like,
Yeah.
and so that's something that needs to be worked on. And for our local government at the same time, although I wasn't very aware of how our local government operated prior to
Hmm.
working for the town. Um, and I also feel like, so there is a type of movement that is occurring now, maybe
Yeah.
just not as, I mean, I would have hoped that we would have been more progressive, or have moved farther down the line of inclusion.
Yeah.
And I'll say that, there's something about the apartment complexes, because I think at some point all of the complexes out here were, for the most part, subsidized, and they
Mm.
all kind of had that same kind of family vibe that happened at Village Park, those in Rolling
Yeah.
Green and over in South Point in the Boulders. But what seemed to happen is that and I think could be incorrect about this, but from my understanding is like their HUD loans had been paid off.
Hmm.
And so they were able to open up those floodgates and the students moved in, and that kind of takes away from that
Yeah.
community feel. And
Yeah.
it's nothing, students need a place to live too.
Yeah.
But
Sure.
as students, they're coming out for their first time and seeing the real world too. So there's like a disconnect sometimes,
Yeah.
because some community members' lives don't match up to what they're used to. And so they don't know how to react to it. And so I think a better way to make it more, and also they move, right? So they're there for
Yeah.
one semester and then
Right.
they're gone. So it's like how much of a relationship is going to be built that way. But I think that
Right.
it changed the structure of
Mm.
that community feel that the complexes used to hold.
Yeah, definitely. And at what point did you start to kind of inch towards being in town government? Because it sounds like it was a little bit of a surprise on your professional path, but at the same
Yes.
time, you are, for folks who don't know, one of the most crucial people. Everybody's crucial. Everyone in town hall, we love you, you're crucial. But you're one of the most crucial people in town hall. People go to you for answers, people go to you for guidance. You're working in a lot of different groups and committees. You're in that sort of nexus of operations. I mean, how did that come to pass for you?
There's like nothing in my resume prior to here that says anything about local government or politics at all. Like there's not. I mean, it literally was like one of these things where I was at a crossroads and I was kind of like, yeah, I think, I'm ready to move out of state. Because I couldn't really feel like, the thing is, I've always worked in human services and I
Right.
love working in human services. It's self-gratifying. I mean, nothing is going to make you feel better than giving somebody 100 pounds of food for their family and getting paid for it at the same time. It's absolutely phenomenal. But there's only so much that you can do and only so much advancements that can happen sometimes in human services. And you're basically working with, you're being overworked often in human services and underpaid often in human services. And so I needed to make a career change. And I just happened to one day be looking on like Craigslist or something and saw this and I was like, oh, why not? And I didn't honestly think that I was going to that I was going to get the job, because I didn't hear anything for like a month and a half. But little did I know, that's how
That's
local
just town
government operates, right? It takes you like 2 months to get hired. So I had applied in March, the beginning of March, and actually, I think I applied almost like 2 days before the closing. Like I was like, how come I hadn't seen this? Because I'd been on Craigslist forever.
Right.
And then, I got a call for the first interview and I went and I completely thought I'd bombed it because former Captain Gunderson, who's very intimidating when you don't know her, was asking me a question and she was getting frustrated by my answers and responses.
No.
And I was like, oh my God. And then before I knew it, I got a phone call from John Musanti, who was our former town manager, who said, yeah, you had a great interview. And I was like, what? Oh, okay. And he's like, do you want to come in for a second? And then it was like another like couple of weeks before I heard him. And, John made it really personable, because he called me when he was doing college tours for his daughter. He says, yeah, I'm on my way doing a college tour and I wanted to offer you this position. And it drastically changed my life. Right. So I mean, I think it was something like a $10,000 to $15,000 increase from what I was doing at the time. And it just set the bar to a different level. And it's like, wow, if I take this, there's no going back. At least I know I have a different standard.
Yeah.
But it took a while because I didn't know anything about local government and the operations, but I could do administrative work. Right. So I was good at that.
What was it about town government that initially like really kept you there? Were there things, I mean, like you say, and I've been in this position as well, when you have administrative skills, you can be in a number of different backdrops, right? And you can do that job well. Town government, to your point about the slowness sometimes, is a very particular animal, and you are dealing with people that are coming in for all different reasons. What was it that started really feeling like a click in for you? Like, this is somewhere that I really can make a difference and feel solid in this position.
I mean, so you're right. Like there's not a lot of BIPOC community members that are working within the local town government. I mean, I think that our police department and our fire department are probably employ more BIPOC community members than there's representation here in town hall. And so it was like kind of one piece of it was like, wow, if I can be here and kick down the doors and bring other community members in so that their voices can be heard and so that, they can go on this path of like, I just didn't know and realize how they can empower their own selves. And I would love to be able to do that. It was hard. It's, there's a language change. I mean, I think honestly, and I say this to everybody and then I'm like, why'd you say that? But like, the word warrant is in every department and used differently. And from my background at the time, a warrant meant you were basically going to jail. So it was just interesting. Like I was like Googling like warrant, like, I don't, like what is, the town clerk uses it, the town manager's office used it, the collector's office uses it. And so it was just like interesting, like just something as simple as the term warrant, and it's used for the same overall at the end, but still in a different manner. Right. So there's like all these different levels of, it's a lifetime of learning, really. It's what it is, because things change. as things change as a nation, as things change like locally,
Yeah.
the government changes. And so it's a lifetime of learning.
It absolutely is. And I think you touch on something that is so crucial, and we're going to get into talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. But for me, language is one of the biggest things. And I always give the example, I got a really awesome job out of graduate school. And I was so pumped, and I was brought in as the creative placemaking project manager, and I was psyched, and everyone else in the office were urban planners. And the number of acronyms that were used in a meeting was ridiculous. Like, they must teach you the ABCs first in urban planning, because everything had like 3 letters. And I would be sitting there just like totally lost and trying to Google acronyms, like language and speaking in a way that people can understand, from the moment someone walks into town hall to anyone who's actually joining the team, is like square one of inclusivity to me. Like, how do you bring that kind of into your work now when you're interacting with people? How do you sort of keep a mind on the language, knowing that you know a lot more at this point than someone who's just walking in the door?
Yep. It's really hard, right?
Yeah.
Because we have a lot of acronyms for like,
For
we have an
everything.
acronym for everything over here. And so it is, because sometimes I'm talking to someone and I'm like, yeah, I'll just be like amherstma.gov. And I'm just so used to saying that, like, it doesn't even occur to me that they're like, what? Right?
Yeah.
And so you really just have to be mindful and like take a deep breath and look at your audience and who you're talking to make sure
Yes.
that you can identify with them and they can identify with you. So bringing something that, meeting at that mutual point is very, very important.
Yeah, definitely. Do you feel like that's something that you feel you're often reminding people that you work with, or people, not even just that you work with, but people that you're coming in contact with in different professional settings? Do you feel comfortable reminding them of that as well? Or are there ways you've found to sort of use your way of speaking to get people to kind of mirror either the pacing or the word choice? How do you bring that in?
I mean, I think so. First of all, I would never say anything to anybody like during
You
the
should.
moment,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like, I just wouldn't do that. And then, but also when it comes to letting somebody know, like, they probably just don't understand what you're talking about because you're kicking acronyms at them and they
Right.
don't know what those are.
Right.
Right. So it's just like, you have to be mindful. Basically
Yeah.
what I just said, you have to be really mindful of who you're speaking with. And you have to realize that we're so used to this world or this culture of local politics, and the
Yeah.
rest of the world may not be. And so it's very important that you break things down. And then, like when the community safety working group first began, I did a PowerPoint for like a workshop for like local government 101, like things you need to know,
Nice.
right?
Yeah.
Like you just have to break things down very simple, because there's things like if you guys all go to an event and then you guys get together and somebody says, hey, what did you think about this last week? Then that is putting you in jeopardy for being in violation of the open meeting law, right? So there's just
Yeah.
very specific things that everybody needs to know. And it's a constant reminder. Like I send out, little cute memes for do not reply all because you can't reply all in local government when you're dealing with the board or committee. You have to,
Right.
you can respond to me and I can forward, but you guys can't communicate within each other there. So it does.
Yeah.
And it's hard for the community, I think, to understand why things are so difficult in town government. And as a
Yeah.
person who's in local government, it is hard. Sometimes I'm like, I don't understand why we can't just what's the problem? But
Yeah.
there's like just there's a lot of rules, and it can make things very difficult to move forward with, which is part of the frustration I think that the community has often with
Yeah.
boards and committees, right? It's just not as simple as having a conversation.
Yeah. Absolutely. And so we're getting a question coming through from Virginia about sort of the nuts and bolts of your position. So can you kind of walk us through
Oh.
walk us through sort of what your position is? And I know that it has kind of bloomed over time somewhat as a result of you and who you are. So where did it begin, and what does a day look like for you now?
Yeah, they're way two different things. So I started, my original or my official title is administrative assistant to the town manager's office, and so the human resources department. And so I came in wearing a double hat already.
Wow.
Um, And so it used to be very administrative. I was heavily involved with the licensing, which we now have our own licensing commission. So they've taken on
Mm-hmm.
that piece, but that really absorbed about 3/4 of my day to day. Licensing is a lot.
Yeah.
And the human resources, it was always like this. I was always town manager top heavy. The select board at the time was very time consuming too, getting their meeting packets, and we had town meeting. So it was like those 250 packets that would go out twice for one session was myself and
Wow.
my coworkers, walking around collating all of those packets together. So printing all of those, printing the annual reports and printing the finance committee book, the finance books and the town budget books. So it was
Wow.
just very administratively driven.
Yeah.
The thing for HR that I consistently have been doing is posting the jobs to the different
Hmm.
platforms. That has been the one thing that I've consistently been doing. Um, so now I wear lots of hats. So I'm still an administrative assistant. I do more backup as opposed to the lead. Um, I've got great coworkers, but it gives me the flexibility and the ability to work on other things and to be creative and connecting with our community, which is I'm really big on because again,
Yeah.
I come from not being in local government at all, and I just feel that it's important that our community is aware that we're here, right?
Yeah.
And your thoughts and your opinions are valuable or invaluable to us. You should feel welcomed when you come into town hall. And
Right.
so the things that I can do to make that happen and to make our workforce be more of a reflection of our community. So when you come
Mm.
into town, like when you're out in the street, you're like, wow, this is great community. I just see everybody, right?
Yeah.
And then you come into town hall and it's a little more one-sided, right? And so
Yeah.
it's like, I don't feel so well. I mean, can you imagine coming in and you have a language barrier and the
Right.
person at the counter doesn't really know how to approach you either. And so it just causes for a feeling of not being included, right?
Yeah.
And so it's really important that people feel included, even if there are things like language barriers, right?
Right.
And there's simple ways that we can do that. We can have signage in multiple languages. We can have a staff that reflects more of the diversity. So, like, even if as a person of color, even if there's not a person of color of brown skin color like myself in the building, if there
Mhm.
are other people from the BIPOC community, and BIPOC community is Black, Indigenous people of color, and it's anybody who's not white,
Mhm.
basically, that work in here, then I still feel like, well, they're making an effort. They're trying, like, right? This is
Right.
great. So I think that is really important piece there too.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I'm
And
just
then
kind of dropped off. I'm sorry. I got distracted by the
no, no,
public
no.
concerns line is ringing like crazy.
Oh no. It's all good.
So I think now, so I'm a human rights coordinator. I'm the staff liaison for the Munson Memorial Library and for the Community Safety Working Group. I
Nice.
am the HR recruiter, a human resources recruiter. I am a community participation officer. I'm trying not to look at the phone. I'm going to
I
do
know,
this
right?
instead. And so I, I, my role has changed drastically. I tried to, when now Amherst Recreational, aka LSSE, was out and about in the community, I would tag along to their events just so people could be aware. Because, like I've
Mm.
said before, it's sometimes they don't have to talk to you, but the more and more they see you in their community, the more and more they feel like
Yes.
maybe I can go and talk to them, right? So
Yes.
it's really just important to keep that connection, that moving forward.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, absolutely. And you and I had the opportunity to kind of start working together a little bit more because you are also the chair of the equity task force for the chamber. And so it's been that really opened up for me a lot of what the town is working on when it comes to these different ways of engaging. And I know that you both spearhead and participate in a lot of that. And your point, the point that you just made that I don't want to lose because I think it's so important is, it's not always necessary to be the one leading an event or organizing an event. Sometimes just being there and being a consistent face for people so they get to an event and they're like, oh, I know her. She was at that last thing. That familiarity can be so helpful. Can you give us a little snapshot of the different events and things that you have been a part of and are a part of organizing now, and kind of what those mean to you as far as community connection points?
Yep. So with leisure services, like they do a lot of fun stuff. I'm sorry, Amherst Recreational now. They do a lot of fun activities pre and hopefully post COVID,
Yeah.
where they go over and they had like a fall festival over in a couple of different complexes, and it was just a lot of
Yeah.
fun. But by then it was like my third or fourth time attending those events with them and being out there in the community. So it's just, again, a great way to stay positive and stay in there. I've joined different efforts put on by the school. So I know at one point they did something over at North Village, and I went and attended, and it was great. I mean, there was something beautiful about being able to go into a community and just all I could hear were multiple languages. And I was just like,
Yeah.
this is like absolutely fantastic. This is
Yeah.
what our community needs to know exists around
Mm,
here. Right. And
yeah.
so it's just small things like that. I also, we connected with, we were having a hard time struggling with how to engage with the community during COVID.
Yeah.
And so I tried to reach out to organizations that had things that were already in existence. So for
Mhm.
instance, um, the mobile market, the mobile food market
Yeah.
that is put on every year. That last year was their first year. So we would go out on Thursday afternoons and Saturday mornings. So Thursdays afternoons we were out at Fort River, and on Saturdays we were out at the bus stop over there on East Hadley Road. And
Yeah.
so when we first started, not many people would come. Sometimes there would be kids at Fort River and their parents on the playground. So I'd bring over masks and like crayons and be like, "Hey, I'm just from the town, and here you go," and take some of those. So that helps engage a little bit. But often
Yeah.
when we were over on Southeast Street, it was very nice because we would send people over to the mobile market, and the mobile market would send people over to us. We always made sure we kept our distance so that
Yeah.
those who didn't necessarily feel safe, that we're going into their environment and they feel safe, and we
Right.
don't want to make them feel not safe by our presence. So we did make
Mm,
sure that we kept a little bit of a distance, but still able to communicate with one another. And we just the information that we learned from doing that was invaluable to us and changed how
yeah.
we structured things for COVID, and helping people who needed to isolate, and how they were going to get food for their kids, and how they could get,
Yeah.
help with rent assistance. So it really just helped us out tremendously in how to support our community.
Yeah. And going out and really meeting people where they are. I mean, it's all of the events that happen on the common and in town center are so awesome. But there are, and I definitely think about this a lot working in the Mill District in North Amherst, and it's one part of town, but it's connected to the rest of town, and making sure that we're sort of going out and meeting people where they are and making it super easy, especially in COVID, but I think continuing on after it as well, to engage with us
It
and
is.
to
It
feel
is.
like we're making the effort to come to them.
Right, because I mean, there's a trust issue for multiple reasons, right?
Sure.
It's not just
Yeah.
necessarily like I went in and paid an excise tax and I didn't like the way I was treated. There's,
Right.
people who might not, there's just lots of different reasons why people have trust, and sometimes it's just
Yeah.
not knowing. And so to meet people at where they are is showing is an attempt to build that bridge, right?
Yeah.
Like let's do this together. Let's move forward together. Let
Yeah.
me hear your input is invaluable because we are making the rules and the policies, and we need your information to make
Yes.
those policies so that they work for everybody, not just one group.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I feel that we're mentioning in different ways a lot around some of the work that you do, that I feel like a lot of committees now are engaging in, around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I've been asking guests recently and want to ask you as well, if you could sort of take a deeper dive into each of those three concepts and how they fit together for you and how they're different. We're trying to keep them from just being words that kind of go in one ear and out the other, because there are sort of principles and approaches and lessons tied up in each one, right?
Right. So I will say that diversity is your measurement of inclusion. right?
Mhm.
So that's how you know that you're inclusive, is because you've got diversity within
Yes.
your organization. I learned that from a TED talk. I don't remember the author's name, but I just kind of ran with it, because it is,
Yes,
if
I
you think
love
about
that.
it, it's really true.
Yeah.
And I'll have to go back and find out who that was so I can credit them in the correct manner. Right,
Be
not just
inclusive
take
of
it from
them.
somebody else. Yes. Inclusion is important because everybody should feel welcomed,
Yeah.
and the equity is because everybody should be a part of it.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's one thing to be welcomed, but it's another thing to be a part of it. Right. So we can
Mm.
welcome you to the table, but if we don't take your input, then
You're just at the
it's,
table.
you're just at the table. So you
Yeah.
need to have all three of them, because diversity is going to measure your inclusion. Your
Right.
inclusion is going to make the community feel welcome, and making it equitable will make them feel like they belong, like they have this,
Right.
their input is valuable.
And it feels so often, at least in rooms that I've been in the last few years, not to discredit the work that anyone is doing, this stuff is hard and it's a process, but it feels often to me like people come at diversity and inclusion from the other end. They're like, oh, we need some people of color because then we're diverse, as opposed to looking at what are we doing that would say to someone in a community, as a person of color, there's room for you here. There
Right.
is something welcoming. And then once they come in, then you're achieving diversity. Like, how do we
Yes.
sort of re-message that? What are some ways that you have found to be inclusive that have been effective?
So, I'm beginning my journey and the work of equity inclusion. So, we have created. I am the co-chair of the core equity team. That is an employee-based team working
Mm.
on inclusion and equity. So, one of the
Ooh.
things that we think about and that are big on our agenda are just like, how do we make our town building and spaces feel welcoming? Like, they're just, it's
Yeah.
kind of like going to the DMV when you walk into the downstairs collector's office, right? But
Yeah.
we want it to be more than like welcoming. So it's
Yeah.
like, you know, repeated customer service, not like
Yeah.
training, not just like once a year, but more often,
Yeah.
right? And then signage is so important, right? Like,
Yes.
nobody's going to know that they can come in the building if they can't read the signs, or nobody's going to know where to
Right.
go if they can't read the signs, right? So you know, signage is very important. Um, I think like the North Amherst Common would be a great place to have like a welcoming, just, how the middle school has the pillars that have the different ways of
Yes.
saying welcome, that North Amherst Common space would be a great place to
Yeah.
have some just welcome in multiple languages. It's just really like, you have to start somewhere, and it doesn't start with just saying like, we're going to go out and hire um you know a, someone from each possible BIPOC. Like, that doesn't do it, because if they
Right.
don't feel welcome, they won't stay,
Right.
right? And so the other piece is, we're working, the core equity team, is I created it's a workshop for uh, in the role that local government plays in equity, right?
Mm.
And so it's just like a basic fundamental 101 equity inclusion training. And it's really so that we all are on the same page as far as it goes with language. So even if
Yeah.
your department does diversity and equity and inclusion trainings, you still have to hopefully come to this one, so that we have a common theme together, and
Right.
we're all on that same page, and that's a good place to start.
Absolutely. I love the idea of those sort of welcome signs. And it's interesting
Mm,
because, once this work starts up, I always hear people say, and this is a huge pet peeve of mine, I always hear people say, there are no people of color in Amherst. That
yep.
phrase specifically. And it's so infuriating. And I know often what people mean when they're saying that. They're feeling, like there isn't a large population, or they're not coming in contact with those populations. But even something that careful as being really cautious around the language you use to not erase people that are there. Like, I love the idea of welcome signs. And we experienced this on the equity task force. We were working on a poster for businesses, and we wanted the slogan that we were putting on there to be in the most commonly spoken languages as we saw it in Amherst. And we ran out of room. There were so many languages that we couldn't decide which ones, there are so many people, to your point about going into North Village and just hearing languages flowing. And a lot of that is students. A lot
Yep.
of that are people who have lived here for a long time. I mean, it's a real it is a real melting pot. And the more that that is sort of brought to the surface, it sounds like, the more we're in a position for people to feel a part of that sort of next level of governance.
Yeah, I mean, and then, it's also, I've been really trying hard to acknowledge and celebrate the different cultural heritages that we have through proclamations
Yeah.
and events. And so that's another way, to get the community engaged. Like, we celebrated our first Lunar New Year celebration, Spring Festival. And it was
Yeah.
fantastic. We didn't have a very large audience, but we had some really deep meaning. Well, we had a decent sized audience, but
Yeah.
we had it was very personable, and you just learned a lot. I learned a lot because I had to write
Huh.
the proclamation. And it was like, I had no idea, but it's absolutely fascinating from on my end too. And to
Yes.
share that with the community is, it's great.
Yeah, it is. I had the same experience through our holiday celebrations, that really were generated from community members, because as we've made it clearer in the Mill District what the role of the placemaker is, I see a big part of that role, and I feel like you do as well, of just making sure people know the door is open. Sometimes
Yep.
that's all it is just making sure the door is open and you're welcome to walk through it. And we had people who, popped up and they were like, can we have a Hanukkah celebration here and a Kwanzaa celebration here? I planned the solstice one. I learned so much about different celebrations and different people's approaches to the same celebration. Three Kings Day was a great example. Can you talk a little bit more about other celebrations that you've brought in that feel like they've really kind of gained a foothold and brought out communities that maybe you weren't expecting?
Yep. So I do want to say, oh, kind of lost my thought there, but all right. So it's I try to collaborate with things that are already existing, not because
Yeah,
I want to take over, but because I want to bring awareness to a
yeah,
group, to a population that isn't aware to what you're already doing.
right.
And if that can't be done in that manner, then I'm okay with trying to create my own
Yes, that's a great
my
point.
own
I'm glad you
events.
said that.
So that has been really, really important. And it's just, we're just so diverse that if in the community itself, that not to celebrate everybody, we should not just celebrate. I mean, I kind of feel like that's the difference between cultural competence and cultural humility a little bit, is that,
Mhm.
like, cultural competence is more like, this is what we celebrate and we know other people celebrate things, but the humility part is like, oh, but let's join what you're doing too,
Yeah,
right?
like
Like,
those phrases.
yeah. So it's also been a lot of fun. So I'm
Yeah,
working on one for Black History Month where we are honoring and recognizing our Black families that have lived here for generations, that are new to Amherst, that grew up in Amherst, that left Amherst.
yeah,
And it's been great because I've been able to reconnect, although we're all connected on Facebook, but people have been calling like, wait, what are you trying to do with my family's
yeah,
photos? And it's
right,
just like, well, it's nice to have this conversation. I haven't talked to you in like 10 years. So
right.
it's been great, to reach out. And so just a little shout out, if people have photos of family members and their family that they want to have represented in this, please send them to the human rights at
Yeah.
amherstma.gov. Sorry, I forgot what that was for a moment. Um, and we can have those included as well.
That's so awesome. And I was just saying to you when we were kind of prepping for this call, that project that you're working on feels very similar to a project that we started in the Mill District just pre-COVID, called One Story at a Time. And it was our plan to highlight families, especially families of color, in these sort of listening sessions. And I believe you came to the one that we got off
Yes.
before COVID happened at Jake's with the Mosley family, which was just beautiful. And Amherst Media did a wonderful job filming it. And then it kind of went dormant and we just were talking about bringing it back. And I feel like this speaks to something that you said when we were prepping for this, which is that there's also a cultural moment happening. And I'm curious what it's like for you. You've been doing this work for a long time, bringing more attention, focusing on ways of being more inclusive. What is it like for you as something becomes more of the moment and more people become involved, which is wonderful? but it also sometimes puts a little pressure on people who have been in it already to make sure that it doesn't get into, you know, tokenizing of things, like to keep it really authentic as the culture kind of starts to rev the engine on something. How do you guide it in to keep it in that authentic rhythm?
I mean, I think you have to keep the community members involved in things. They're, you know, so for instance, like the Juneteenth celebration was something that the Shabazz family and the Cage family has always done, and
Yeah,
my involvement. So I created a proclamation in support of Juneteenth to help their efforts be known. But it's a community event, and the town's not just trying to come and take over it. So I try to,
yeah,
just how can I help you guys? How can I?
yeah.
And I think one of the other things with the cultural events is that I'm trying to put in place, because one of the most important things about equity inclusion is you have to put things in place that when you're gone won't disappear,
Oh
right?
my gosh, you can say that so many more
So you
times.
you so all of these proclamations, like I need them to happen enough so that the town, the community is expecting that these events will occur every year,
Yeah,
so that they remain if I am to, for whatever reason, leave, or at
right,
some point I will retire, whichever happens first. So
right.
um, it's important to when you're trying to establish you know, systems that will stay in place when the people that are at that table leave.
What are some ways that you go about making sure that's going to happen, and or like ways that you notice it happening that you kind of watch for?
Um, I think the example that I used of like people are anticipating it happening again is a great one, right? Like,
That demand.
and so I'm
Yeah.
really big on, like, I think, the first MLK March that I did, so I noticed that we always had a Martin Luther King proclamation, but we did not necessarily, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, sorry,
Mhm.
proclamation, but we didn't really have an event towards it. And I was like, well, we kind of need to do something. So I was able to have them ring the bells 15 times to mark his day. And we didn't want to interfere with the Dr. Martin Luther King breakfast committee, because that is something that is outstanding. The community looks for it every
Yeah.
year. It gets larger and better every year. So
Yeah.
shout out to them. But we still as a town need to represent as well. And
Right.
so um just having the event, the one time it was small, we did a march, we picked up a few people, we went to the library, we sang the Black anthem, lift every voice and sing, and then we
Yeah.
had some footage. Like, I there's not you don't have an event for me without some video in it, because I
No.
love it. And so we read some of his literature, which is what we did this year, but it was virtual, right? And then
Mhm.
so it's just doing it. And even when it starts out small, realize, like, as time goes on and as people enjoy that and find that it's meaningful, it'll get bigger and bigger. And once it
Yeah.
gets bigger and bigger, that will ensure you that people will be looking for it
Yes.
as it goes down the line,
Yes.
or as
That
time
is
goes
such a good
by.
point. That's such a good point. And I think you're pointing to something important, which is really listening out for the community response. Not just people who show up, but do they talk about it after that? Do you see it on social media afterwards? And people like, oh, I'm sorry, I missed that. And to really
Yeah.
like see that sort of rooting into an event that means people are gonna keep looking for it.
Yeah.
That's so I feel like, and I try to push this on a lot of people sometimes, I know, but I feel like what you do is so similar to placemaking. Do you consider yourself a placemaker when you think about the work that you're doing in the community?
So yeah, Hannah, what exactly?
Totally fair question.
What does that mean to be a placemaker? I mean, I have my own thoughts, but let's hear what you have to
Yes.
say about
Oh
it.
no, this is fun. I want to hear your thoughts on it too. Okay, so from my perspective, and this is somewhat driven, I will admit, by my background is in the arts, and so I think people can come to placemaking from a lot of different perspectives. Um, my feeling about placemaking or placekeeping, which I think some people like to call it, and I think that is an important word choice for everybody to make, is really looking at the intersection of arts and culture and history and economic development, right? Economic development is something that is part of the world we live in. It can mean different things in different places, but without being really mindful of the inclusive use of arts, culture, and history, the knowledge of it, the lifting up of it, the shining spotlights on it. Without that, places are going to develop in ways that are not tied in to a continuity of place. And it's that continuity of place that keeps everyone feeling connected, at home, and from feeling displaced or pushed out. And so that's what it is to me. And the more that organizations, developers, businesses, chambers of commerce, town municipalities, the more we sort of put someone in place, whether they're called a placemaker or not, who's keeping an eye on that and keeping a mind to that and making sure that information is moving in the community between those players, the more we put people in those positions, the healthier and more sustainable and more inclusive and equitable development can be. That's how I feel about placemaking. And that's why it's important to me. And sometimes it's just a facilitation position. Sometimes it's just communication, and so what does it mean to you?
Well, I don't think I tied it. No, I don't think I tied it so much to the economic piece as more as I did to the communications piece.
Yeah.
Right. But I would definitely say that, yes, to some degree, I am a placemaker, right? Because I am trying to bring those same things, cultural history, and tie them all into our current economics and into our current community.
Yes, right. I love that. I know I try and push it on everyone. You don't have to call yourself that to be it. That's one of the best things about it. So I know we're getting close to time and you've been so generous. I did see a question come through. I want to get back to it over here. There's some curiosity about work being done by the town around public transportation. With North Amherst, the malls and other towns nearby, buses are so important. Yeah.
I mean, I can speak on that just from firsthand. I don't necessarily know what's going on in the world, like what we're doing about that, but that is a piece of inclusivity. I, for many years, didn't have a car with kids, and like it's something to be said that when you take a bus to get uptown and you have to take another bus, but that bus comes 5 minutes before the bus that you're on gets to town.
Right.
It's not very helpful. And then you have to wait another 45 minutes. It's hard when you're a community member and the students leave and the schedule changes. And especially in the winter when it's cold, right? Like there's a level of that. The nice thing about it is that they're free, right? Like that's probably, I mean, that's a beautiful thing. Not many communities have free bus services, but we do, except for that Northampton bus. But it's still, there's still room for improvement. There's still areas that have become more popular where bus stops need to be brought to. So that is a part of the inclusivity. Haven't quite gotten there yet, but it is definitely I appreciate that question because it is something that does need to be included.
Absolutely included. And I love that you sort of tied it into the inclusivity conversation. And I appreciate the question being asked too, because, public transportation is not only something to talk about, but it's something to use, right? Like you don't have to not have a car to make the choice to use public transportation, especially as we keep talking about climate change, right? And all the different aspects of how we can support that. It's really use of public transportation that is going to make the biggest difference alongside budget decisions and alongside, people speaking out for it. It's definitely about usage.
There are many, many communities where you do not necessarily need to have a car to survive, right? So that means things like there are places where you can pick up groceries that are in a more walkable distance, or that you can grab a bus on. When you think about the way that the cities are structured, we know that they're larger, yes, so it's not necessarily fair, but like if each of our sections had like their own little stores, which I know the mill, we've got Atkins, but Atkins is far out. If you're over in the South Point Boulders area, that's far, right? And that bus, it runs differently too. So there's something to be said about the fact that we could be a community that is more supportive of its community in itself, in the sense that we have the things that people need in what we could consider little villages, like a South Amherst
Yeah.
village and a North Amherst village, which you guys are doing now, an
Yes.
East Village area, which I consider
Right.
to be that rolling green area.
Yeah.
So yeah, in
Yeah.
South Amherst, yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that touches on, we won't go into zoning here necessarily, because I think it's taking it's taking over everyone's life a little bit in Amherst and Greenfield and everywhere right now. But when we think of things like mixed use development, I think that's often part of the conversation, is what amenities are close to people in these different places. A robust downtown is wonderful and it's the anchor, but having those outlying communities be able to get a lot of, not all of, but a lot of what they need close to home, that is a climate change issue and an inclusivity issue and all these other things.
An equitable issue to
And an
equity
equitable,
issue.
yes, absolutely.
And I just have to say that we don't have enough time for me to go into the whole housing
You can come back.
issue, but
Mhm.
you're right. Thank you. Will say that I am completely pro, do you call it mixed housing? Right?
Mixed use housing, yeah.
Mixed use housing,
Yeah.
right? Because you cannot absolutely not put up a structure with 36 apartments where people don't have access to their front yards or their backyards without going through hallways and expect that to be a success, right? But everybody can learn from each other, right?
Yeah.
So people of different nationalities can learn about other nationalities, so that they had horrible thoughts of stereotypes and just those things can break down and build community in itself if we increased our mixed use housing versus just affordable housing here and the more wealthier housing here. If we mix that, it creates a better community.
Yes, absolutely true. I think that really can't be overstated. And I will encourage you, Jen, to go over to our Facebook page, because there are a lot of lovely comments on here about you. But I do want to share one comment coming through from Stacy, who's tuning in, and she just wanted to share that using the bus system taught her how to slow down in life and gave her a chance to meet a lot of great people. And I feel like that's, speaking to something it's not just about the utilitarianism of it. It's a community builder, which I feel like you're speaking to it with the mixed use housing as well. So I think the last question I wanted to ask you, because I thought it was a good point when we were preparing for this conversation, there's a big push, an important push to get people to join boards, join committees, get involved in town government. And you made the point that, that's not everybody's thing. Not everybody wants to be on a board or a committee or has the time to be, or what have you. What are some other ways that you suggest to people to make sure that their voice is being heard and they're being involved in a way that might work for them? Or what are some ways you've seen people get involved that are outside of that more traditional board joining kind of stuff?
I just have to back up and say, though, one of the issues with boards and committees is that they're not always equitable for everyone, and they're not necessarily inclusive. So if the one thing that has come out of the pandemic that's really helpful is that we've been able to do things on Zoom, which I have found that in some of our boards and committees that we have a larger audience, even that only means 1 or 2 people, but
that's something.
It's an increase because people can sit home and cook dinner and listen, right? Like they don't necessarily have to. So even just attending a board and committee meeting that is in interest to you, right, is being active and making comments during public comments, or also bringing attention to us that there might be a lack of a board or committee that would be helpful, right? So that's always very, very helpful too. Anytime that we have public forums, coming and speaking your experiences in Amherst is always helpful. So we just have
I hear a phone.
we just have multiple different ways. Sorry about that. People can get involved. I mean, and we're working on them constantly. Because boards and committees aren't like, you couldn't put me on a finance committee because I just it's not my cup of tea, right? But if someone said there's a human services committee, then that might be something I'm more interested in as well.
Right. I appreciate that. So really finding the things you're interested in, and your point about attending things. You don't necessarily have to be on that board or committee to be listening in and to be adding something to the conversation. I experienced that in a meeting last night, and I think that that's a really, really great point to be making. And I know that your day is so crazy, and I'll give a little plug to folks. If you go back to our conversation with Jen's colleague, Bree Sunrid, from a few weeks ago, she talked a lot about the communications coming from the town and ways to make sure your voice is being heard from a technological aspect. And I really can't say enough, having seen a lot of municipal websites, the Amherst website is really easy to navigate, and there is so much great information, and it's kept up to date, and the social media as well. So to Jen's point, just, you know, getting involved and listening in. I know not everybody has that digital technological accessibility, but if you do, it's a really great way. So
and then joining any events that we have is also a good way to be inclusive. And people need to understand that the community experiences that we hear, whether they're positive or negative, are so important, and they need to be what they need to be what drives us to make policy change. Right. So that feedback, those experiences is what should be driving us for policy change.
Yes, absolutely. Jen, you're just remarkable, and I so appreciate your time. I know all the things are going in the background. Thank you so much for coming on and talking to me today. And I have a feeling we're going to have you back, because there's a lot more.
Oh yeah. Yep.
Right?
Yep. I plan to do much more. Got much more coming.
Yes. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. We'll release you to the rest of your day. Do hop over and read the comments. You are much beloved, and very deservedly so.
Oh, thank you so much. It was a pleasure for having me. Thank you.
Yes, and we will talk to you soon.
Bye.